Okay, welcome back. I hope everybody is refreshed for another very important session. And is what should be the political vision and strategy of the international trade union movement. And we are happy to have a very high-level panel here, including Christy Hoffman on the screen. We're very happy that you can join us remotely. And maybe, if I may exploit my role as a chair, we should also use the session, since we have the panel, which I will introduce to you in a minute, have something like mind all wanted to know about the Global Union Federation and never dared to ask, something like that. So, I think we really should exploit the high-level chair that we have here. So I have on my left, this is Daniel Bertossa from Public Services International, PSI. You remember the first day, it's the Public Service International Global Union Federation. He's the Director of Policy. Ambet Yuson from the BWI unfortunately cannot join us. So we will miss him, but nevertheless.
But we're seeing him tomorrow.
Oh, we'll see him tomorrow. Fantastic. Okay. Then next we have Stuart Howard from the International Transport Federations, the ITF. He is the assistant to the General Secretary. And Dan Gallin, I don't think I need to introduce to you Dan Gallin anymore, the former General Secretary of the IUF, now GLI Geneva. And Dan will do, Christy Hoffman from Union Network International, UNI, who's joining us via Skype, listening very carefully, but of course you will also have the chance to do your bit in this panel discussion. So Dan is going to give us a short introduction of what we mean by this question, and a little bit of some help for our panelists to respond into a direction. Because as we know, different unions, and this is the same for the GAF, they have different kind of political orientations. They don't always have the same. And this is determined by sector. This is determined, of course, by the membership. So I think that Dan will have some focus on how the different global union federations position themselves to certain broader political questions. So please, Dan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Karen. Actually, I just want to illustrate the reason why we're having this discussion. Some examples, if I'm going to raise any question is why things don't happen that should be happening. Why do we need this discussion? There are three major issues staring us in the face as we speak. Russia, China, Greece. Now, Russia is about the sequels of Stalinism, 70 years of Stalinism. What this means today is the emergence of an increasingly why do we need this repressive, authoritarian and aggressive system under the control and leadership of Putin and a small circle of his associates in the KGB, former KGB, now FSB. And the entire former Stalinist system has mutated into a capitalist ruling class, playing by the same rules of brutality and lawlessness. The other consequence, the other sequel is an atomized, demoralized, and disoriented working class, with one large trade union federation claiming a membership of 15 to 20 million, which is under government control. That's the FNPR. And a smaller, independent and honest one, that's the KTR. And both are members of the ITUC. Now, the FNPR has invited Putin and Medvedev to lead the May Day march 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And last November, the vice president of the FNPR, Andrei Isaev, went to the Congress of the French Fascist Party, the National Front, to bring the fraternal greetings of United Russia, which is Putin's party, of which he is a deputy in the Russian parliament, in Duma, the Duma. And as you may have heard, Russia subventioned heavily the National Front in France and other fascist parties in Europe. Now, that struck me as a remarkable fact, and I wrote Sharon a letter where I asked her what the ITUC thought about one of its major affiliates sending a fraternal delegate to the leading fascist party in Europe. I didn't get an answer until later, but what apparently happened next is that Sharon Burrow went to the Congress of FLPR in Sochi, and she asked the General Secretary, Shmakov, what was going on. And Shmakov said he had no idea that this had happened, which is impossible. But anyway, so, anyway, Isaev was there as a deputy of the party and not as in his capacity as vice president of the Trade Union Confederation. Now, the similar problems, submission to authoritarian state structures and political structures, as well as corruption issues, arise in all of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. In the Global Union federations. For example, also remarkable. I mean, this is the fact of something not happening, like as in Conan Doyle, the dog that didn't bark, is as significant as things that happen. In a FTU, or China Federation of Trade Unions, and also in the case of Vietnam, the Vietnam Confederation of Labor, are trade union organizations, even though everyone knows that they are state-controlled. So the issue is finally, what are the standards that allow an organization to call itself a trade union and to be accepted as such? Or are there any to, for example, win a majority of the next Congress, the ITUC, or the one after that? And what happens then? Then there's Greece. What Greece has shown us is a new step in the aggressive and destructive austerity policies which the financial institutions, in this particular case, the Troika, European Union, European Central Bank, and International Monetary Fund, are trying to impose throughout the world, and in this particular case, Greece. And here, the political intention is clear. The economic issues weigh far less than the political issues. The economic issues would have been not to allow Greek people to get away with electing a genuinely left-wing government that is challenging the austerity policies of the European Union, which has mutated into an authoritarian and regressive body since the Barroso Commission, at least. So we have a situation which is a worldwide attack on the labor movement, the trade union movement, everything we stand for, and the achievements that we have been able to record in the post-war period. A counter-revolution is on the march. And very little happens at international level. And I have to say, with a shameful complicity of most of social democracy and of a large part of the trade union movement, in the case of Greece particularly. So, you know, there is this popular belief about the behavior of frogs. One believes that you take a frog and you put it in a cold water, and then you start heating the water. And this popular belief is that the frog doesn't react, and if the water heats up gradually, it will not react until it's too late, and the frog gets boiled. Now, this is nonsense. Frogs are not... Frogs don't behave this way. When frogs see that there's a life-threatening circumstance surrounding them, they jump out and go away. Not so the trade union movement. Not so the trade union movement. In the trade union movement, we believe that somebody is going to come, some higher power is going to come in time to turn off the gas. And of course, it doesn't necessarily happen. That is why we need a discussion on vision, on political vision and political strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. That was a lot for thought for you.
No, sure.
Is Christy still with us?
Not at the moment, I don't think.
She's not at the moment. Okay.
in the interests of global financial capital who want their money paid back. Right? So it's the fact that the rules have been set in a certain way that mean that gain is almost inevitable. And capitals work this out. Capitals work this out. You know, you can move billions of dollars around the globe, with a flick of a button, and capital does this. But Labor has struggled to work out how to do that. So we know, for example, that multinational corporations shift production around to drive wages down. I mean, Labor gets that. What it also does is it shifts its taxes around to places with the lowest rates of taxation. So there's a race to the bottom in taxation, which starves our nation states of the funds they need to build the things we look for in our state. The trade agreements that we're seeing are essentially about creating binding rules that override your country's constitutions, that are written behind closed doors in the interests of people who trade. And these people are some of the wealthiest people in our nation. So the trade debate is a debate where capital has realised that if you write the global rules, you can be as strong as you like locally, and you can, within the parameters, they've set the parameters. And so in terms of this vision, I think it's very important that as unionists and as progressives, we understand that the writing of the global rules is the new game. It is the new game. And it creates some interesting questions for us. That brings us on to power and everything that old is new again. It's not a technical question, it's a question of power. And it's a question of building that power. And as collectivists, we build that power among who lack power by combining. I mean, that's at the basis of everything we do. And we need to rethink what that means in a global world. It means organising workers in the way we've always done it, because we need to add to our movement. But it might also mean combining with other non-traditional labour organisations, civil society, social movements, unlikely allies sometimes as well. And I think we need to think through those strategies about how we do that. Now that can be controversial in labour circles, and I'm not suggesting for a moment we move away from labour collectivism. I mean, the future of labour is the hope of the world. It's just that the fight Labor has on its hands has changed a bit. Okay, think about trying to organise a union in your country without a national government. Just try and conceptualise what that would mean, how you would have that fight, because that's what happened 300 years ago, and still happens today in some countries. We try to organise workers to increase their lot in the world, and if you don't have a government to face, or you have an employer who has the backing of a government that's not democratic, it changes the game. It's very difficult circumstances, and that's what we face globally. We face a series of institutions with what I call a democratic, not just a democratic deficit, because these institutions are elected, or they have democratic governments who appoint people. There's a democratic distance. The decisions that are made that affect workers in your countries are made a long way away from where those workers are, and it's very hard to because of the distance, to actually get workers to understand what is in their interest in some of these faraway institutions. And for me, in terms of a vision and a strategy, they are the types of answers we need to be looking for. And they're about power. They're about educating workers, they're about giving political analysis, as we've heard a bit about, and then they're about building power. And there's no ABC to that. You build, the right way to build power is the way that makes you the strongest and the most accountable. The last point is that everything old is new again. It's fashionable to talk about new models because we face new circumstances. It's fashionable to talk about new models. The internet's going to save us, or we just need to do these sort of new different types of agreements that will save us, or workers need to understand their identity and their power in identity politics. These things are all the new hopes. It's my view that while the circumstances are fundamentally altered and we need to adapt to those, actually what we're seeing is a repeat of things we saw a couple of hundred years ago when we didn't have our own nation states. Mm-hmm. We're seeing escalations in the rising inequality. We're seeing capital becoming increasingly unaccountable. We're seeing attacks on workers' organisations and institutions that go unresponded to, and I think that was part of the point that was being made, that parts of the movement that should be reacting don't react. And if you look at national struggles over the course of history, we're littered with these examples where workers who are very close by to other workers under attack don't respond because they're paralysed or because they don't understand the broader pictures. We're seeing more of this going on. And so I'll finish perhaps with just a bit on technology. Sometimes we're told that it's the fact of technology that changes things and there's nothing you can do about it. And I find that a deeply demotivating sentiment. The new technology that we face in general, I think, is good for the disempowered, generally, but only if we make it so. Okay? So if you look at, for example, video cameras and motion pictures, I mean, Capital's worked out how to make money out of that. They've got Hollywood, you know, they've got all these movies that demotivate workers and keep them at home and not out talking about politics. They've worked out how to use that. We forget that we can and should use those methods as well. I mean, one simple point that is often overlooked is that 30, 40 years ago, well, the coal miner strikes is an interesting example, and prior to that, if you had an altercation with a police person, it was likely that they were going to be able to abuse their power, and there was nothing you could do about it because it required witness testimony. And the word of a police officer, a sworn police officer, was always going to hold more weight than the word of a union official or a radical. Well, we've got cameras now. We've got video cameras. We can record these things, and so we get, you know, if we use these tools properly, and that's a minor, almost imperceptible point. But the point is, if we use these tools to our advantage, we can gain out of this. And we should be thinking about how to do that. Not saying, oh, the internet means all our problems are going to be fixed. And as Dan said, you know, the advent of the internet means that we don't have to worry anymore because the union movement's going to be saved. No, the advent of the internet gives the union movement a tool, if we choose to use it, to build our own power. And so finally, I'd finish on vision as a personal question. Again, against this idea that vision is something that, you know, a great orator has that we then follow. What history shows us is that change takes quite a long time. Shifts happen in powerful ways, even without us always understanding. I mean, if you look at the way in which, for example, the Jasmine Revolution came about, and some of the stuff in the Middle East, a lot of it didn't go quite where it should have. And again, this is another classic example that Dan's raising about how the union movement was paralysed for too long and didn't shift quickly enough to support the truly progressive forces when there was a chance of actually changing the world. The point I want to make is that part of that was because we didn't see it coming. And part of that is because it happened very quickly. Very, very quickly. But you don't always know when it is. And so it's important that we don't get impatient for change. It's important that we understand that these changes ferment over many years, and that each of us talking in our workplace, in our union, with our colleagues and our families, or in our organising patch, if enough people are doing that, you're shifting the base. And then when an instant happens, when a moment happens, if that base has been created with a level of politicisation and analysis, then things can shift. And so, two things I'd call for with your personal vision. One is patience. So be patient. But two, patience doesn't mean not doing anything. There's a need for discipline. There's a need to continue to have the conversations, to continue to talk to individual workers, to continue to organise in workplaces, to continue to make the links across workplaces, across sectors, across countries, as we're doing here today, and to understand that those links are the links that will make us powerful and will increase our collective power. So when the moments come in history where of change, and I think we're entering into a phase because of this fragmentation of the poles of power in the world, where these opportunities will start to come. And I don't think it's a coincidence that we've seen 2 or 3 massively fractious changes in the last 2 or 3 years, whether it be in Russia, whether it be in Greece, whether it be in the Middle East. I think this will speed up as power in the world fractures. It increases the need for us to be organised and have a good analysis and be waiting. And that's a personal vision for all of us. not to stop doing the daily work that we need to do while we wait for the great leader and the great speech. That's quite macro. I'm happy to answer questions later about sort of specific points. That's all I'll say.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Daniel, this was 40 minutes, so I'm to give you, just to bear in mind to be equal among the time, because I didn't give you time. But maybe what it would be helpful for our further discussion if you, in 1 minute, maybe could tell your general analysis that you had to refer it specifically to PSI and their members. I mean, just for example, if you say the national governments are becoming less powerful, these are basically your counterparts when you go into negotiations. Does this mean anything, or how do you discuss this? Any kind of link to your general analysis? What does this mean for PSI, and how is this discussed in your union? This is 1 minute. I would even give you 2.
Yeah. PSI has politically prioritised international institutions in our work. That fits in with the analysis I was talking about. PSI is defending the welfare state and the importance of things like taxation and trade agreements. So that fits into the rulemaking, the taxation stuff. PSI is fighting against privatisation because it is multinational companies that tend to do the privatising. So that's global capital defeating nation states who are unable to hold on to their public services. And PSI in our work closely with civil society. Not all civil society, but civil society who share our analysis and are disciplined and able to work in coalitions to build our power. So that's that idea of looking for new ways to build power. So they're very specific things that PSI does in regards to that more general analysis.
I just got the message that Christy is again with us, so welcome back, Christy. I hope you enjoy the discussion, and I'm sure you will be able to catch up. So, but without further delay, I'd like now Stuart to come up with the ITF position.
With the ITF position, okay. In fact, I'll start with, in a way, what is our specific response to the sort of changing conditions in the global economy and the way in which global power operates. Which of course has been going on for a long time, but I would look to a specific moment, perhaps back in 2002. One of the things that really struck us was we had a dispute in the West Coast ports in the United States, and it was actually not a strike, it was a lockout of the US dock workers, the IWU. Within a couple of days of that lockout occurring, you actually had President Bush coming out onto the Rose Lawn and invoking the Taft-Hartley Act in the United States, which forced the company and the workers to go back to work, because the impact on the US economy was so immediate. Now, we were used historically in the docks industry that if you have a dispute, it has knock-on effects into the rest of the economy. But what you had now was those kind of knock-on effects when you have a production system around the world which is globally organized, globally divided, parts of any car or computer being made in any number of different companies and then assembled in somewhere else and then sent on somewhere, and all operating through what were called just-in-time delivery systems, then the magnification effect when you get an interruption in that logistics, that supply chain process, was enormous. And it made us think, because for transport workers, you're sat in the midst of this global economy's nervous system. And what it ought to mean, and what traditionally in trade union history it would mean, is if you occupy that strategic position, then you ought to be very, very powerful as a trade union. But if we looked at ourselves and looked at what happened, had our power increased during this process of globalization? No, it had not. We, like every other part of the union movement, had suffered loss of membership, had suffered laws all around every country in the world which made it harder to organise trade union, reduce trade union rights, the structure of employment changing, outsourcing increasing. So despite the fact that we occupied this strategic position, we weren't getting an increased power from it. But one of the problems we also recognised was that we were not structured to actually be able to take that strategic position. We were structured still in basically a 19th century industry structure in the organisation. We have a railway workers section, we have a seafarers section, we have a dock workers section, and they operate independently of each other. Capital wasn't operating like that anymore. The movement of goods around the world didn't matter. It was railways, then onto a plane, then onto a ship, then onto it was those things. And we were not structurally, we had barriers to being able to take advantage of a potentially powerful situation. And really from that time and from that dispute, we have tried to work since on the challenge of how do we grasp that strategic position that transport workers ought to have in the global economy, and what do we need to do to restructure ourselves and our union, the unions that are parts of the ITF, to be able to grab that power, to be able to use it for the benefit of workers. That process is not a quick or easy process, and I'll come on to some of the issues that Dan raised in a minute, but unions are conservative organisations, conservative with a small c. They don't adapt quickly. They don't respond to change rapidly. We've been discussing globalisation for years, had documents about globalisation, had very good policies all about globalisation, but the organisation was the same. The way it worked was the same. We hadn't changed ourselves, we hadn't responded to that situation. But at least we were starting to see there's a problem here. There is something that we need to address. And I think, but nevertheless, we were still for a long time in the position where we were producing beautiful analyses of the global transport industry, the rise of global logistics, the impact of that on the global economy, its strategic place, etc., etc. But still, we hadn't really changed the way in which we worked. We hadn't worked out the gap between having a policy and being able to act effectively. Now, one issue is, but I'm not sure whether necessarily the critical issue is, that global union federations are not something that just were created a few years ago. Each of us is over 100 years old. Now that's always a matter of pride on one level, but it means you've got 100 years worth of baggage that you're carrying around with you. And that baggage has included the whole process, historical processes of the splits in the labour union movement in the Cold War, the post-1989, other revolutions that have taken place around the world. When we can't adapt to some of the fundamentals in our own industries, we're even further from adapting to some of those changed political situations. And we have a membership within our organisations which is made up of a pretty mixed bag of unions. Some of them are really good, some of them are pretty shit. And we have no, to be honest with you, we have no real mechanisms for cleaning house, in a way that we are trapped to a certain extent, is that generally our unions don't want to get rid of other unions from the ITF. If it's not affecting them immediately, why would they bother? Why are they going to offend somebody else? Why are they going to go through that political pain? And they don't really understand that country anyway. So it's not an easy process to go through. And Dan mentioned about standards, about the standards of unions that are in. We have no standards, really. We have no piece of paper which says to be a member of the ITF, you have to have this, 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 and this. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. But that's, and so you trundle along with what you have. What you do have, though, is you have some very good, highly motivated unions who want to grab hold of the organisation, who want to turn it from an organisation which was organising a world set of meetings and turn it into an organisation that organises a world set of actions, that increase union strength. We are within the ITF. We are going through processes now that we have never gone through before, analysing our own finances. Where do they come from? Where do they, how do we spend our budgets? We've done the same thing for so many years after year after year after years without analysing how do we allocate our budget? Do we get a good return for way to put our money in this campaign or that campaign? What works? What doesn't work? Global union federations are probably ready to accept we don't evaluate. We don't have systematic evaluations of what we do. But this is what we have to get into now. We have to be far more sharp and smart about what we do. I think in that process, that will bring us face to face with some of the issues that we need to be confronted with about our own membership and about quality of membership. Well, we won't get very far with any organising strategy if we're made up of unions who have no interest in organising, who have no interest in taking on capital. We're not going to get very far with that. But what we have to do at the moment is focus on where our strengths actually are, which unions are ready to put into the pot, which unions much more than just pay their affiliation fees. Because a global union federation should not be a secretariat which runs international solidarity. It has to be a worldwide group of unions who are working together in solidarity with each other. And yes, in solidarity with other social movements. It's hard to possibly portray how ossified the international union movement has been. If you looked back over certainly 20 years ago, we didn't even talk to each other. We know between, say, PSI and ITF, we didn't talk to much each other. Let alone talk to social movements, and they were strange people. So, and also, yes, we had that Cold War baggage. These were revolutionaries. And in a way, I think that what we're almost developing at the moment is a kind of syndicalism without the revolutionary bit. But if you want to take on capital, and when you look at situations like Greece, and I think, Greece at the moment has to be some kind of tipping point. When you have got international institutions saying, we will crush a country. We will crush a country, and you can have as many TV crews there as you want, filming it happening. We will crush it, and it will happen. And yes, international union movement doing what? Doing what? We hadn't got the capacity to respond. Not just talking about, it's the mental capacity almost to respond to that situation in the way that it needs to be responded to.
We sent a very strongly worded letter last week.
Well, there you go.
We sent a very strongly worded letter last week. No, we did. There was a letter that was sent off, very, very strongly worded by all the leaders of the union movement. But some say it might be a little late.
Not quite enough.
Yeah.
But if you look at how the attitudes that were within the in the international labour movement many years ago, and myself and Dave used to work, actually had a little office here at one point on a magazine that was trying to raise the consciousness about the international labour movement then and what it was working on. Then I sold out and became an international union. But but it is that there are nevertheless significant changes. And I think that they are quite common now across the different global union federations, about a much more openness to working with others, a much more openness about saying we're not worried about our territory, we need to work with it. what are our combined resources to try and take on capital? And if we look at our own memberships, it can be depressing. We can look at, where do we really have strength? We can say how many million members we represent. We can say how many unions in different countries. If we look at how many of those unions are good unions, how many of those unions have maybe even good but have no capacity, you get the number starts to get frighteningly small. But that should never put us off, because one thing that I think that we have experienced, or what I have seen in my trade union life, is one of the most difficult things in the world is to kill off a trade union, except with money. That's probably the best effective way of killing it off. But it is very, very hard. You can have apartheid, you can have all kinds of repression, you can have whatever's going on in Russia or the Arab world. Workers organise. They always organise. It's a shame on us if we don't seize the opportunity of that. It's a shame on us if we shut people out from the international union movement. I think we're moving away from that. We, for the first time in our executive board, are insisting that when a union that applies to join the ITF where we feel there is no good reason for it not to belong to the ITF, it's no longer good enough for one of our other affiliates in that country who are in competition with that union to say, no, we want to keep them out. It's a very difficult battle, and it's an uneven one, because there are still powerful unions who, if they say no, we're not yet at the position where we can enforce it through. But though we had never even done that before, now we are doing that that kind of thing. We are more self-analytical, I think, more self-critical, more open to different ways of working, and now we're starting to reallocate our funds away from just a particular budget for a particular industry section, and to say, what is it we want to do? What are our key targets? What are our key industrial targets? Because if we don't have strength, if we don't have power, we can have the best words in the world, but no one is going to take a blind bit of notice of them.
Thank you so much. Honest and self-critical words, I must say.
I might want you to destroy that tape.
Christy, are you with us?
I am. I'm not sure if you can hear me, but
We can hear you. We can hear you very well.
Good.
Okay, so you were able to follow the debate a little bit?
I was able to follow Stuart very well and Daniel, and I trailed off a bit on Dan. So, but I think I understand the questions, and I will try to speak briefly, because I realize it's really hard to listen to someone who's not there in person and see. But I would like to make a few points on this question. So should I just launch into it?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Wonderful. Please start.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for inviting me. And again, I'm sorry I can't. And the immediate question you've asked us to answer is about our political strategy and political goals. And I just want to echo some of the points that Stuart made. Is obviously we're a federation, we have unions from a wide range across the political spectrum, so we don't really engage in national politics with a small p. I mean, for example, just today or recently, two of our leaders in the United States, Larry Cohen and Mark Dimmonstein of the Postal Workers, they're launching a big campaign for Bernie Sanders at the Socialist Party for president. Other large affiliates that we have in the U.S. may agree with Bernie on everything he says, but they don't think that's the right political path. So these are kind of the common debates our affiliates have, which obviously we're not engaged at that level of politics. But I think we do share, and increasingly share, a very strong consensus on challenging corporate power, building worker power. I think this is where global unions can add the most value to the work of the labor movement, broadly speaking. Our mission is to grow the power of workers through building strong unions and through changing the rules of the global economy so we can create a just society. And it is finding the right balance and the right allocation between those two aims that proves the most challenging. We just had our Congress 6 months ago, and our work was organized around 3 pillars, And I would argue really it comes down to two key pillars. But we have three. Our theme is including you in union growth. How do we inspire and mobilize more workers and unions to organize? What's our role in that? Including you in creating a fair economy, which means fighting against the current crisis of inequality, low pay, the current trade regime, and the trade agreements on the table. And third is this question of the new world of work, where a world where many people would say we will not even have employers, we'll all be self-employed, let alone unions. So I think, all of these three themes are related because unions have to grow their power in order to address income inequality and to secure a just future, curtail corporate power and greed, which really, we're at a crisis of the level of corporate power right now, and what can we do to restrain that? So for us, the key issue is, how do we use our limited resources, our limited capacity to move beyond the rhetoric, which we all have, and our resolutions and towards concrete action? Because I want to agree with Stuart, it's really how do we choose and act upon priorities so that we can deliver results, and we've got to be very self-critical about how we spend our time, and there's so many issues that would be worthy of attention if we had the resources to dig into everything, and we obviously can't do that. We have come back to the fact that we think growth, organizing, collective bargaining has to be really the key pillar of what we're focused on. It's got to be the answer to any plan to reduce inequality. We need a social safety net, fair taxation, and income redistribution. This requires a reconnection to the employment relationship. It is essential. Union growth is really the central pillar of our work in all of our sectors. We have decided to focus our resources on that. We have campaigns in 43 countries of some degrees of size and strength and ambition. We have about 60 organizers in the field that we've helped to fund and train and develop. This focus on organizing really includes both the right to organize through various means, including pressure on multinationals, but also the reality of organizing through capacity development and resources. So that's our key. I would say, for uni, we've made a decision and to do that, and that means not doing other things. I mean, I don't think it's not been something that has been not without debate, without tension. There are always increasing demands that people say, why can't we do this or that? And so we've made a decision not to wander into too many other areas. However, the second big piece, I think that where we feel like we can play a meaningful role is influencing global institutions. And I say that notwithstanding that, yes, we want our affiliates, and we try to inspire and mobilize our affiliates through raising consciousness about national issues as well. And clearly on trade, it's very hard. It's not really being carried out, these trade negotiations, through a global, at the global institutional level. This is, a lot of the debate happens at the national level, so we can play a big role there to develop a common policy that our affiliates then use at the national level. But I think we can also be in a better position on the global stage to influence on some of these key areas. And within that global institutional space, there has to be a division of labor between the Global Union Federation and the ITUC. And we clearly have decided that the ITUC should be taking the lead on some issues at the global level. In fact, probably many, or not most, issues. So climate change, for example, it is a key issue of global capital. It's not just an issue of the environment. It's gonna require that we reconstruct global capitalism in order to take on climate change. The ITUC is taking the lead on that, but we are trying to support it any way we can. Trade is very, very important. Our affiliates are very motivated to fight against the trade agreements that are on the the table right now, but it's not clear exactly what the role of the global union federations, the best role is beyond education and advocacy. And then last, supply chain regulation. I think we have a moment right now where we can really make some progress on limiting, if not heavily influencing, hopefully limiting corporate power across the supply chain. I think that the events in Rana Plaza have proven to be more of a catalyst for an opportunity for more changes across the supply chain model that we have right now. And that's something where I think we're working with ITF, we're working with all the global union federations, we're working with the ITUC. That's where I think that we need to take this opportunity and really try to change the rules, whether it's changing institutions, changing international law, national law, and then negotiating agreements with corporations to impose requirements on how they treat workers in their supply chain. So I think there we have an opportunity to really change the game. And I think that's a hopeful sign. Another hopeful sign in the question of wages and flat and stalled out wages, there's an increasing recognition that workers aren't going to take it anymore. You just see what's happening in the United States, the sort of mobilization across the whole country around low wages. That's very, very unusual. That's something that hasn't happened in many, many years in the US, that low wage workers are just kind of saying we're fed up with $7 an hour. And I don't want to just single out the United States because I'm United States, but I think as an example of there is an increasing recognition that even among the economists of capitalism that this crisis is driving everyone into the ground, and our economies won't grow with this model of a tiny record small share of the labor of the global economy for workers. So we, I think, should seize this moment and again reassert the importance of unions in addressing this kind of fundamental crisis of legitimacy in the global system. And last, I just want to say, so I think those are very, there's signs of real possibility for change in supply chain, also income inequality at a moment where it's at a tipping point. I hope we're at a moment where it's at a tipping point on climate change. I think lastly, I want just to echo, I share everyone's frustration. Why can't we do more on Greece? We're all watching as things unfold, daily basis, and it's unconscionable what the Troika is doing to the Greek people, and I share everyone's frustration. Yes, we've sent letters, yes, we've taken a resolution. We adopted a resolution in Argentina last week in support of the Greek government, but that's not really enough to, what should we be doing? And so I think that's a question for self-reflection that we should have out there. But I've talked long, I have no idea what's included in the room, so I think I'll stop here and answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christy. Most of it we got, as far as I'm concerned. Most of what you said was well received. At the end, I would like to give Dan the possibility also to respond to everything that was said. But first, really, I would like to give the floor to you, maybe to 5 people with questions, comments, whatever you like.
Don't we have discussion? Huh?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is Martin, who was the second? That was you, Barbara. Okay, fine. Martin, this time.
A question to Stuart. So I couldn't agree more with the need for house cleaning that you talked about, for principle. But I would like to connect to the previous session. I mean, if there is a need to be more principled, why then have you recently signed an MOU with ACFU? I find that very confusing.
Can I ask people to stand up so that our
Yes.
can hear us?
Yeah. Could you please stand up? Yeah.
My name is Josie. I'm from South Africa. and I'm from the Housing Assembly. I'm an activist. We screened our very short documentary last night on just the housing crisis because I want to touch on the issue of the first speaker who raised the issue that in today's world as trade unions we are challenged internationally by this agreements and just the way the economy is working and how that impacts on us as workers, trade unions, but also as the working class. I think that it's an important discussion that we're having, but I also think that the discussion must be a very practical discussion. So when the speaker raises the issue of the coming together of organized workers and social movements, I think that must be a bit unpacked, and we must look at the strategies, because I think we, as trade unionists, and I think the second speaker made the point that sometimes within our international federations, we are also stuck in, we understand globalization, but we are stuck in the old way of thinking and doing things. So, for instance, as the Housing Assembly, I believe that part of, because we're not talking just about building a strong international union, we're also talking about building a strong working class movement that needs to change society, that needs to have an impact in improving of the living conditions, not only of workers at the point of production, but also in the communities. Now, for instance, housing is a critical issue, because I'm sure that many of the trade unionists here would probably know of many of the members that either can't afford housing anymore, evicted, the kids can't go to school anymore because schooling is privatized, healthcare is privatized. So because we must, to change the structure within the union is going to be an ongoing thing. But whilst we recognize that and understand that, how do we practically link up those movements with organized labor? And I think that is the challenge for the labor movements, not only here, but I think elsewhere. But I believe that there are critical issues that are challenges for the working class internationally in the period of austerity. One is the one of wages, the other is the one of employment, the other is the one of housing, the other of health, the other is the one of education. So should we not, at some point, whilst we trying to respond to how the market is changing, how do we, in a practical way, how do we combine those struggles and campaigns and make it of trade union work, and not an act of solidarity?
Well taken. Barbara, what's next?
I think Stuart was spot on when he pointed out that the Gulfs carry a baggage of a century, and a very, very interesting century too. And I think that set the context for what, in my view, a central element for developing a political vision for the Gulfs was, in my humble opinion, not tackled. That the point of departure of that is the current social economic formation. Is capitalism immutable? Can't it be changed? And I think, yes, we have learned lessons from Stalinism, and which Dan Gallin pointed out. Isn't it possible to envision democratic post-capitalist reality? Because this would inform the strategy brought to bear. While gave an inkling to an argument I had posed elsewhere, that this is the greatest crisis after the Great Depression. But the bosses we are forced to give the New Deal, the social compromise and all that. Why? Because the labor movement was asking for something beyond the rubric of their system. And that was why I did say then when the Global Jobs Pact thing came up, that look, as soon as they realized that we're not asking for much more than what they could, they went back on it. All the attempt to carry the Gulfs along, immediately the shit hit the fan in 2008, all that came back. So I think it is important, this issue of that fear, that, of socialism, I think it came up in PSI in 2002, when the Canadian unions pushed for the Venezuelan trade unions to be affiliated, and they was like, no. And why? So I think drawing lessons from the past, we can envision and that should inform our strategy. And I think the bottom line, the question is it that we as workers want to be better fed, better treated, better respected slaves, or we want to be free women and free men in a better society? So I think that point of departure of the future, a post-capitalist future, a democratic post-capitalist future, should be the point of departure in formulating a new political vision for the jobs.
Thank you very much. I just got a note that might be a little bit difficult. Christy is on and off, so if you have questions for Christy, maybe we do that at the very end, and we hope that she will be online at that moment. So I'm
on now. It's okay.
You are here. Wonderful. So the next person I have on my list is Bert.
Yeah, good afternoon. Bert Scoundberg, GLI Trade Union. An operational matter, really. Are GUFs still as relevant today as they were years ago? The point was made there's a lot of crossover now. Sectors aren't as clear-cut as they used to be. Therefore, for the sake of the agility of the international trade union movement, is there not a case for moving the GUFs into the International Union Confederation as sections within that for a more coherent response to the problems that face us today?
Okay. A concrete suggestion here at this point. Sorry, I first have cut.
Well, I'd like to comment on that if
Thought you might.
Why not? Go
ahead.
We cut this off your time.
But I think that you raised a good point on the blurred lines among the GUFs, and really, I think one of the things Stuart alluded to is that we're working across between GUFs together with the same sector or employer, even more than ever before. So UNI and ITF have been working together for a few years jointly on the DHL work. We're working together with Industrial, both on the supply chain stuff through the garment industry, with us representing retailers and them on the production side. We're working with them on in our packaging sector, which there's a lot of crossover between our graphical and Industrial's packaging. So we have a lot of joint work, I'd say more than ever. Whether that means some sectors should be merged or, mergers and this kind of restructuring, sometimes it's a huge amount of effort for very little payoff in the end. If we spend, it would be, I don't think that any of us feel it would be the best outcome would be that we all merge into the ITUC. That might take 20 years of planning, and then, at that point, is that really worth it? But I do think that working across GUFs closely is becoming more and more important as our industries merge and become blurred. And I do think that we're doing that much more effectively than we ever have.
Thank you very much. So I still have Kat on my list, and then I take Asa and you, and then I give them the chance to respond.
I'm Kat, I work for the Commercial Services Union in the UK. I just want to say I found it really refreshing what Stuart was saying about looking internally within the ITF, looking at what works and what doesn't. My union, GCS, is the public sector union. It's had massive amounts of cuts over the last 5 years. Yesterday, there was another 20 billion public sector cuts announced in the government budget, and we've not question really is for Daniel as well, is has the PSI ever done that itself? And have you ever had to internally see if this is still relevant to what's going on? And I mean this in the context of like the increased use of multinationals, the privatisations, and precarious work. We're not that reflective really of our membership these days, and we're having to completely change. And also, how would you, as well, all of you really, support your affiliates who are looking at these obstacles and then looking at positive changes?
Wonderful, thank you. So I take two more, and then I give the panel the opportunity to respond. So it's Asaf.
I'm Asaf Hadid from Hoffman, in Israel. When I come from the outside of the established trade union movement, and I have the feeling with this kind of gathering here, organized by Dave and GLI, that there is an idea here, and this is really that some people in the global trade union movement think that some change has to be made in the global labor movement and the local unions in order to respond to what is going around us, because labor is losing ground, because capital is becoming more and more aggressive, and we see things that are happening, and we have to respond, and we are not prepared, we are not organized, we are not strong enough, dynamic enough to put a response to what is happening. And what I think that there is one thing that comes to at least where I stand in the eastern part of the Mediterranean, we are undergoing in the last several years catastrophe. Hundreds of thousands of people are being massacred. We are seeing, as a result of this, tens of thousands of migrants from Syria and, of course, also from Africa, Libya, going on to Europe. This creates a racist approach by the governments of Europe. They are approaching Greece in a very brutal way, as was mentioned here. I think it's very important of Greece, and the fact that there's no enough response from Greece. What I'm saying here is something that goes into the European societies, because you have a very strong tendency of many parts of the societies, including inside the working class, to turn to the right wing, to isolationism, to hate of migrants, to hate of Muslims. And this is something very, very serious, and the rise of the fascist forces is very clear. I think nothing has to be added about it. And if the trade union movement, and one thing I want to conclude with is like this. There is a functional approach to say, well, the unions before were sort of ignorant or even negative towards students, NGOs, social movements, gay movement, women movement, migrants. This was foolish. Why should we bring them in? It will make us bigger, it will make us stronger. Okay, this is, I say, it is positive, but it is a functional position to make the unions stronger, but there's something that is beyond the question of function of building our unions. The question is the function of the union as a leader of the society, the function of the union as pointing where are we going. How can a union can stop its mouth and not speak about the racist approach to the migrants? How can a union see a war going on and not speak about it? This is a point that maybe at some point it might be creating problems inside the union. So it's sort of countering your need to make a bigger union. But a bigger union that is not responding to social and political issues is the frog that Dan was speaking about. It will just die in the hot water. This will happen.
So you are the last before the...
Hi, I'm Clara Pera from PCS, and I'm the president of the culture sector in the UK, so we represent museum and gallery workers. And I'm quite new on international work, and I don't really understand how all this bureaucratic structure actually I tried to, get in touch with global unions about a campaign we are running in the National Gallery, which is one of the 10 most visited museums in the world, where the biggest privatization ever seen in a UK museum is actually going on, with people taking 45 days of strike action, and we've been in the press in New York and in Japan. And I found it quite puzzling that I couldn't reach out to PSI. It's taking ages, about 6 months for my international department to even get some information about the next director who's coming through. I've actually met with one person from PSI, but there's been no follow-up whatsoever. So I'm a bit like disgruntled because I am a museum worker, and Stuart said it became a trade union bureaucrat. So I'm just wondering, who are you? How do you end up in those positions? Are you actually spies or workers? I don't know. So I would like to know. My question really is, what's your trade?
So you got 10 minutes to respond comprehensively. All of you, not you.
Okay.
Yeah.
First thing to say, I'll start with that one because it's a pointed question. The first thing to say is that it's the easiest trap to fall into is to confuse the union bureaucracy with the union movement. I mean, the government. Our head office has about 25 staff. We represent about 20 million workers. Our biggest asset of our movement is not me, right? The biggest asset of our movement is our members and our affiliates, right? So I'm really sorry to tell you, but me returning your phone call isn't going to solve your problems, right? But there are some things that we can do together, and we should. So we spoke last night, and we'll speak more. But don't confuse the union bureaucracy with the union movement, and certainly don't confuse union movement with the union bureaucracy with union power, because we've got lots of union bureaucracy, yet our power keeps declining. There's another specific question about PSI, and that is whether or not we've had the rethink. That's actually probably even more pointed question. We had a shift of our leadership 2.5 years ago, and so we've had a major political shift inside PSI. And you only have to go to our website and hear our leaders speak to understand that is significant and ongoing. Okay, so that some of the points that Aya were making are taken up by that. We've seen our political perspective shift. Public sector unions are a little bit different to private sector unions and particularly the GUFs, because our employers different. Capitalists are not our employers. Governments are our employers, right? And that changes the bargaining relationship. It particularly changes the bargaining relationship across national boundaries. Okay, so we don't do as many framework agreements because it's very hard to do a framework agreement with the government of, Spain, because it's the government of Spain. So it does change, and public sector unions are more conservative, despite in the sense that Stuart was talking about. Politically often more radical, organisationally more conservative. And so for PSI, that's a very hard. The organisational questions are very difficult. I'm not going to say any more than that. Certainly not while the camera's rolling. The Baba Aya said, is capitalism immutable? I think it's the opposite question. I think capital is infinitely flexible, and that's our problem, because capitalism shifts and moves and responds quickly, and we take 100 years to work out that we might have a problem. Quickly, a last point on strategies for worker social movement alliances. But I think that was a point I raised. It was a point that was taken up. I mean, we could spend a whole 3 days talking about that. But very quickly, we do it in PSI, in our tax justice work, in our trade work, in our anti-privatisation work. There is a very critical point that was made at the end about, and people have made it about your own affiliates and then working coalition. It's a very, very, very controversial thing to say that we should have less affiliates and get smaller, but work more with civil society. I mean, that is a controversial thing to say in the union movement. But in my mind, that's not the question. The question is this question of political analysis. The people in our movement should be the people with whom we agree with on a political analysis, because we don't want to get bigger if we're not combining with the people with the same ideas. And the people in civil society we combine with should be the people who share our political analysis. It's not that we should combine with all civil society. It's not that we should combine with every gay rights organisation. It's we should be combining, and that's a political choice. That's a very specific political choice. And it's the same political choice as which affiliate you bring in. So not having the criteria, whether it's your affiliates or whether it's your social movement partners, is actually the point. The only other thing I'd say, well, and then the other thing that just goes to that question of resources. I mean, part of the reason why that is a difficult question is because we are under-resourced. You know, why is it that we don't kick out a union that, you know, perhaps couldn't quite be in? Well, it's because they send us Jews. You know, let's be really honest about that. That's it. You know, and until we work out ways to make ourselves stronger, that's going to be a harder discussion to have.
Okay, before I give to Stuart, I think I'd just like to make two provocative comments. One is there's obviously a competition going on, which trade union structure is more conservative. So, and the resources, of course, is always a critical issue, but you always have to live with the resources you got, right? And you always have to make choices. So I think this is the question we have to answer and to have to bear in mind, because otherwise you're getting paralyzed in the trade union structure. But now, please, Stuart, with another conservative trade union structure.
Well, there were a whole set of questions that were asked. There was one very specific to the ITF, which was about the memorandum of understanding that we signed with the ACFTU. This was signed. This has been a matter of debate, both in the ITF and in amongst other global union federations, is about how do you engage with China. And not just the fact that China, the context of that, of course, is just, it's not just that there is a country with a very repressive system operating in its borders, but it's such a major player in the global economy. You cannot ignore China. You have to have some response to China. And it's been tossed around in the union movement about whether engagement with the ACFTU, and you know, recognizing we have somebody with us here from the China Labour Bulletin who would be far better able to speak about China than I am. But within the union movement and our affiliates, and especially our affiliates, I would say in Asia Pacific, this issue about do you engage with the ACFTU? How do you? What's the best way, or what are there any ways of influencing what happens in China? How do we get to know? Are there cracks in the ACFTU? All of these things. How do you support workers in China? Whether it's the right decision was made that there would be engagement, would be active engagement with the ACFTU, and the ITF signed a memorandum of understanding. And that has resulted in exchanges of information and visits, etc. So that was a very, I think, contentious political decision, but that was the decision that the ITF made in relation to China.
Okay, we have officially 2 minutes, and Christy, you already responded, but if you want to make some quick points, I would give you a little bit of time for that, because I really would like to give Dan the opportunity maybe to respond to what was discussed overall. Christy?
I've been in and out, so I won't respond much. I do want to say on the question of China that China's not eligible for membership, I don't think, into any of our organizations because they're not an independent union. We all recognize that. There's quite a lot of interest in having some level of engagement with ACFTU, where they are sectors or where we have employers, where there might be some probing to see whether is there any productive work that we could do with them. So I'm just echo what Stuart said, which is that there is some looking around. We've had some delegations there mainly in connection with Walmart because it's a huge global campaign and trying to play a big role in that, and ACFU actually has an interest in Walmart. So a few overlapping areas of work, but nevertheless, they're not really an independent union, and they're not eligible to join uni, and that's where that issue ends. Hard just to completely ignore China, but it's a clear situation by any means in terms of what that means for going forward. I'll close there. I know there were some other questions that I didn't quite hear, so I think we'll just hand it back to Christy.
Okay. Thank you so much, Christy. This time it was very difficult to understand, but I hope we got a little bit of what you said. And now I really like to give the floor to Dan. What is the state of the frog?
No, well, I just want to raise another question. I mean, I think this was a very interesting discussion. I liked what Stuart had to say about the introspection process in the ITF and the internal critical leading to regeneration process. Excellent. Also, we heard from Cindy Hoffman about in UNI generally the PSI also the Daniel. Generally speaking, one gets a sense that the international trade union movement, at least those who are represented here, has gotten a message, is opening up, to becoming less sectarian, less territorial, more efficient, etc. But I think that the Asaf raised a very important issue, which is that the interest of the trade union movement is not separate from the interest of society, and that it is, in a sense, that labor movement does represent the general interest of society. It is not a special interest group, as our enemies try to describe us. It is it coincides with the general interest of society, and therefore one more reason why we should be allying ourselves with social movements which are close to us and have converging interests. But essentially, there is a big question which remains unanswered. Why do we want to do all these things? Why do we want to become more powerful? Why do we want to become more efficient, etc.? In the sense that do we want a better capitalism? Supposing we could turn the clock back to, say, 1950, where in Europe at least, the labor movement had a very strong position and was more or less able to create a situation of class a balance of classes, which led to eventually to the social partnership ideology. But anyway, assuming all the efforts we take into reforming the movement to make it stronger, to bring about changes, is it worth to spend all this to improve capitalism? We now know what capitalism does. We've seen what it's done in Russia, in the territories of the former Soviet Union and Soviet bloc. We see what it's trying to do in Greece. What it's trying to do in Greece, it's what it has already done in Latin America and Africa and Asia, all this for decades. We are reaching a dead end, and I think we're coming to the point. I mean, the environment, an existential issue, for human life. And we know what capitalism is doing on the environment. So we are reaching a point where we have to ask ourselves, don't we want to do something else? Don't we want to create all this effort for a different society? Now, this question a few decades ago, in the 30s, was very easy. We said, yes, of course, socialism. Now, this has become a very complicated issue today because the meaning of socialism has changed. The meaning of socialism has become unclear because the concept has been hijacked by movements and operations that have nothing to do with the objectives of socialism, original objective of the exercise. It seems to me that we're going to have to answer the question of the kind of politics that we need to work for to solve all these problems, which are, and this is a very major undertaking. We have not had time in this summer school to discuss socialism properly. It is something that we do need to discuss. I hope we can do it next year, and in between times, so we can come to get some clarity on if not a consensus, at least some clarity of where the real issues are.
Thank you all.
One more thing. Bert asked about the why not put all the govs into the ITUC. You know, there was in the 20s, the International Transportworkers Federation had a brilliant general secretary called Edo Fimmen, who was a revolutionary socialist, and he had the idea. He saw that the International Federation of Trade Unions, the forerunner of the ITUC, was used in a crisis situation. The crisis situation was the occupation of the Ruhr by the French and Belgian armies to try to force the Weimar Republic to pay up reparations which they couldn't pay. So, and he believed that the labor movement should have been able in a position to prevent that from happening. It didn't happen, and the IFTU didn't do anything. So his idea was, instead of having an international confederation based on national federations, territorial federations, in other words, like the TUC, like the DGB and so forth, instead have an international federation based on what was then called the International Trade Secretariats, now the Global Union Federations. Then he saw it was politically unworkable, so he modified his proposal a bit. In other words, have a dual structure, both national centers and ITSs. A little bit like the French system of Union départementale and Fédération d'Industrie. That didn't get any traction either. Was opposed by the IFTU, and then World War II broke out, and the discussion was over. Now, his assumption was that the global union federations represented more directly the class interest, and that an international trade union policy had to be class interest. And today, the situation is more complicated. I think the global union federations have developed unevenly and in different directions, and it is not no more practical now than it would have been in the 20s. But the reflection on a proper division of labor and a proper distribution among ourselves of the tasks that need to be done and the type of cooperation that needs to happen, that is always topical. That is always a necessary discussion to have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. So we, with a little bit of delay, we made it. So Dave, maybe you can explain how we carry on from this.
Thank Christy for.
Well, I thank them all. I thank Daniel, Stuart, Dan, and Christy. Christy, you are still there? No, she's not there. Okay. I thank everybody.
No, yeah. Well, obviously, we hope Stuart and Daniel will carry on being part of this.
What is this now? I don't understand what's happening now.
Neither do I quite, so I'm trying to make sense of it myself. No, I do.
Why don't we all have coffee?